The next cinema to appear in Chatham was the Imperial Picture Palace, which opened on the 28th of January 1914. This was the beginning of a long history of cinemas on this site, which continued until well into the late 1990s, but by then it had become a multi-screen ABC cinema.
We used to always go to the sweet shop across the road before we went into the cinema. You weren't supposed to take sweets or anything in with you, but whenever my mum took us to the pictures, or we went to the pictures, my mum would pack a picnic. So we'd take sandwiches and cakes and drinks.
It stood at 385 High Street, Chatham, and it was by far the largest of all the Medway cinemas at the time and could seat 1,700 people. The Chatham News suggested the new building is a decided ornament to this portion of the town. It stood on a site which was formerly occupied by 2 shops and 4 cottages. It was originally constructed in red brick with stone dressing in a free Renaissance style and stood end-on to the street. The designer was George Bond, who also designed Chatham Hall and the Theatre Royal.
My favourite memory is going to see Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2, I've been waiting a long time for it, a lot of the horror fans all waiting a long time for Evil Dead 2, and it comes out, and I think, great, I'm going to go see that, so I go down to Chatham. Back in the days, you had to queue up outside cinemas, and I turned up at the cinema, and there was this massive queue. I mean, this queue was huge, and going around the block thing, I said to him, is this the queue for Evil Dead? He said, no, this is for Secret of My Success, I think it was, Michael J. Fox. So I said, well, where's the queue for the Evil Dead then? They said, he's over there.
The ABC in Chatham, I remember watching Jaws in there. I remember sitting on the hill beside the cinema, waiting to get it in the queue, waiting to get in to see Jaws and Star Wars.
My name's Stephen O'Donnell, and I was an usher at the ABC, primarily between, I think, 2000 and 2001. The secret areas, I don't think they're really secret areas, but there were areas that the general public never got to see in the ABC. So they were areas that used to be used when obviously the place was a lot busier, before like the Virgin Cinema opened in Rochester. So from the main entrance, where you had the stairs that go up to the first level, and you had stairs that went down to the 2 lower screens. If you walked right past those screens, past where the toilets were, there was a back corridor. Right at the end was the fire escape. And we used to have to unlock and lock that up every night. And then to the right, there was a double doors. And inside those double doors, it was basically a storage room. But at one point, and going by the decoration of it, it was a bar area in the 80s. So there was a lot of kind of black, glossy materials. There was, black ash wood everywhere. It was very, picture an 80s bar, and that's what it looked like. It was just, you walked in and it was just like it had just literally been abandoned overnight one time.
But yeah, it's the only cinema I can remember. It had a licensed bar. So I lived in Maidstone, but we'd go to the ABC so we could have a drink.
The cinema cost £11,000. Films were accompanied by the IPP Ladies Orchestra under the direction of Miss Bruin. Few people had cars in those days, so parking was not an issue. However, the management provided storage facilities for bicycles and prams.
One thing I do remember is when we used to drive there, we used to park on a hill. You'd go past the cinema and there was a hill almost next to it, and it was like almost 45 degrees, this hill. And you'd put your car on it, but you'd spend half the film thinking about the film and half the film thinking, is my handbrake held?
In opening the cinema, the Mayor of Chatham declared, "Pictures are here to stay," which received loud cheers and much applause. To begin with, there were only evening performances, with matinees on Saturdays and Wednesdays, prices ranging from 1 shilling in the circle down to 2pence in the front stalls. Children paid 1 penny when accompanied by an adult.
They had a Herbie car in the lobby.
What, in the ABC?
In the ABC. Because it was low, you could drive, they could get it in. An actual VW car, done up as Herbie, was in the front there.
I'd imagine if you could find blueprints of when the place was first built in the 30s, the spaces and the rooms, because like the old cinema across the road, the Regent, there would have been big tea rooms and, there was all sorts of locations when it was a big, an open theatre basically, before it was split into the 3 screens for the cinema. There was a lot that I never even got to see as well, because from the main street, you could see that there was windows on the right-hand side of the building. So there was clearly other offices or locations that had been closed off maybe decades before.
In August 1927, the cinema was acquired by W. W. Thompson, the owner of Gillingham's Grand, and was renamed the New Regent. A 2-manual 8-rank Christie organ was fitted at a cost of £1,000. In 1929, the cinema was taken over by Associated British Cinemas. The cinema retained its name, the Regent. This was followed by a lengthy rebuilding programme lasting from January 1937 until July 1938. During this time, the Christie organ was removed. The major rebuilding programme included a massive brick elevation and was designed by William Glenn, who had designed the Ritz nearby. A new Compton organ had been ordered for the newly restored cinema and a pit dug ready for the console. But the order was cancelled when the ABC took over the Ritz opposite, where they already had a Wurlitzer organ installed. At that time, organ interludes were an important part of cinema programmes. The rebuilt cinema had an elegant but functional interior. It was decorated in several shades of pink and blue, merging into brown on the side.
Although, speaking of secret hidden areas, the little fire escapes that obviously had the signs, outside of those, there was actually, again, quite a lot of the building that no one ever saw. But we'd have to go through them to actually lock up with chains the fire escapes at night. And the amount of times I'd walk through those corridors and you would notice the paint looked fresh, but it had clearly not been painted in about 40 years. It was the colours, there was like pinks and browns. There was a lot of Art Deco-y and 1940s looking lampshades and things. And there was even toilets down those corridors as well. And if you look through the keyhole, because they were all locked up, they looked super clean, but they'd clearly been locked for, 40, 50 years or so since they were last used. I guess probably going back to when it became the 3-screen cinema, those areas had just been kind of put behind doors and forgotten about.
The seating had been increased to 1,906, which included 755 seats in the circle. From the 1950s onwards, ABC cinemas began increasingly to show X-rated films, as both Gaumont and Odeon were reluctant to show them, as it might break their policy of family viewing.
I remember my friend's mother was an usherette there. Days when we used to have ushers and usherettes, and she worked there as an usherette, and she got us in free of charge to see Superman 4. Terrible, terrible film, terrible.
The Regent was the cinema that showed the first 3D film, which was The House of Wax with Vincent Price. This was shown on the 23rd of August 1953. The cinema closed as a single unit on the 22nd of January 1972 for conversion into a triple-screen cinema, and the 1,647-seat auditorium was divided into separate units, accommodating 528, 366 and 172 people.
Why were you taking photos in the projection? Or of the cinema?
Because it was closing down and I'd taken photographs of the plaza coming down, and I wanted to get in and take photographs of a cinema working before it closed. I found out it was going to close, and I approached the manager and asked if I could. When I got in to take the photographs, I went into the projection room, spoke to the projectionist, and said that I wanted to take some photographs of him. He didn't know what I wanted to take photographs of. I said, just do what you normally do. So I've got photographs of him putting the film on a couple of turntables, and they'd run it on that to get it onto the projector. And he also would splice the adverts into it. And he gave me one of the adverts because it was the last few times that the cinema was actually going to be showing films, because it was closing. And he gave me one of the adverts, and it's Walker's Crisps with the Gary Lineker nicking the crisps from kids.
But when you first went up the stairs, when you went in, you got the little landing area before you turned right and went up to screen 1. And straight in front, there was a door. And when you went through there, a couple of little corridors, and you were in the manager's office. And it was Mr. Frost was the manager, I think, as long as I can remember. I won't say grumpy, but he was quite a strict old man, and he liked things done in a certain way. And in his office, it was quite a small little office, just filing cabinets everywhere. But all across the walls, you could tell he'd worked in cinema a very long time, because he had photos with so many movie stars. I can remember a picture with him with Tom Hanks, a lot of kind of 70s and 80s era actors.
I got the manager to stand on the stairs, and where he would normally stand to greet people when they first came in, to go up to the, because you could go up or you could go down. And I got him standing there. And he took me down to the bar, and there was seats in there, stored seats, cinema seats, the ones that tilt up and down. And he said that I could have some, and I've got 4 cinema seats in my cellar, and I've also got 2 tall ashtrays.
The worst job, which I hated doing, and I think everyone did, was changing the marquee at the front of the cinema for what films were on. It wasn't exactly the most even pavement, and you're talking, a 30-foot ladder on the street, and you'd have to go up where one of the fire exits was. There was I think it was a curved staircase around, and there was I think it was the cleaner's cupboard. You'd have to go through their little room into a back room, and all along this wall, they were all the letters, the numbers, the certifications, and you'd have to, look at what films were on in each screen, pick all the letters off, go downstairs, put everything where it needs to be, and then go round the back of the cinema. Behind one of the doors, there was the big ladder was down a side, old staircase again, another place. I think it went into the basement, never went down there. But supposedly the basement still had the old organ in it from back when it was silent films and musical. It was there apparently, but you'd have to get this ladder. You needed help to carry it because it was so long. Someone had to stand guard while you put the ladder up and climbed up it to take all the letters off and replace them all. I have a fear of heights, so that was not a fun job.
In 1986, this and other ABC cinemas became part of the Canon Group, renaming them Canons. This company was itself taken over by MGM, and for a time its cinemas were known as MGMs.
By that point, the big multi-screen in Rochester was, doing great business, so the cinema had gone really quiet. And our uniform at the time was just a red polo shirt with the ABC logo on it and a little name badge with the ABC logo on it as well. And so screen one, I think that had maybe 500 seats. But you were lucky to get 10 to 20 people in sometimes. But I think it was because of the way it was all set up. Mr. Frost was quite strict about still using a torch to show people to their seats. It was quite, proper. But there was a few times where I'd be, asking someone to follow me and I'd be walking them because you had to try and balance where everyone was sitting to keep the surround sound working properly, so that sound didn't bounce off in the wrong places. But the amount of times I'd be leading with my torch, then I'd turn around and they'd gone and sat somewhere else in the cinema.
I wasn't there for the last showing, but I was there for the last film, and right at the last minute, as everybody's putting their coats on, I got my camera out nervously, bang, bang. I couldn't take any more because at that point, of course, the flash, everybody realised what I was doing, but I got the pictures of them putting their coats on anyway.
I think the last film they showed there was probably the first Harry Potter, and the first Lord of the Rings. I think they were the two last films that were on at the cinema.
The cinema finally closed its doors on the 3rd of January 2002 after showing films for almost 90 years. A sad end indeed.